All right. We've got a few people that have joined us today. Let's give everybody a few more minutes to kind of trickle in. I know some of us I'm on the Eastern time zone today, so I know this is lunchtime for a lot of us here. See some familiar names. I see Pat. Hey, Pat, good to see you. See Spencer.
Hey,
Spencer, I thought, hey, Pat.
what's going on, guys?
Hey, Spencer. I was thinking maybe I was going to see you here at the convention in Indiana. Are you here? Are
Uh,
you here?
no, I'm expecting my first child here in the next 2, 3 weeks. So the wife kind of put a halt on how much traveling I'm doing.
Congratulations.
Appreciate you, man.
Josh, good to see you. Sherry's here. Let's see. Lee's joining us here. Yeah, a lot of familiar faces. Good to see everybody. Okay. Well, Chris, thanks for joining us this morning. Chris is out in sunny California, and we're going to talk a little bit about plant operations today. We're going to talk about equipment selection, assessing bottlenecks, just talking shop about plant ops more or less, and nobody I could think of that I'd rather do that with than Chris. Chris and I have worked together on a couple of projects, but we've also, Chris is involved in NPAN as part of our meat and poultry processing technical assistance team. Chris has got his own consulting firm where he helps meat processors around the country with a myriad of aspects, and I'll let him speak to that. But as a plant manager, he's come in as a consultant and trained my crews before, and he's got a way with explaining um, complex concepts and processes to people that's really relatable and understandable, which is like a very important skill in the plant, as we all know. So, um, without further ado, we're going to jump in just a minute, but first, I want to kind of talk about who we are in case this is your first session with us. Who is NPAN? We are the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. We're housed at Oregon State University. We're half trade group, half extension group, and basically we're made up of meat processors, um, livestock producers, small brands, aggregators, CPG brands, retail shops and butchers, e-commerce brands and butchers, and then we've got industry reps and academia making up the rest of the pie there. So we're a pretty diverse group of pros, but what we all have in common is that we're all working in the niche meat space, generally plants with 50 or less employees. The vast majority of our community are plants that have less than 20 employees. So basically, what we're trying to do is help small meat processors thrive by growing our shared wealth of information. So we have an awesome way to co-learn via our listserv, which is a Google group under our name. It's probably the best meat industry live help desk that there is. Chris is pretty active on there. I'm active on there, and you can get real answers to real industry questions. It's not like a kind of a social media group, um, among many other things, including webinars like this. We also offer tools and technical assistance for small processors and the farmers, marketers, and meat buyers who depend on them. We also want to incorporate the whole array of interests involved in the supply chain model to support the long-term viability of the small to mid-sized meat sector. And in a nutshell, what that means is we're not just working with meat processors, we're not just working with livestock producers. We're also trying to bring smaller scale logistics organizations under the umbrella. We're having contractors and wastewater management contractors and engineers and feasibility study and business planners and financial fractional CFOs and financial coaches and marketing professionals and sales professionals and anybody that can be of assistance in our small community here. We're trying to bring under the tent. So that's us. And before we move on, I've got one more thing. Right now, this makes me feel like a telethon person on the public radio, but right now it is time for the annual survey. So what we do in Q1 of every year is when Rebecca and I plan our content for the season, we want it to be relevant. We don't want to be another organization that's just putting up another, marketing webinar that you don't need to see for the 10th time. We're trying to do things that are relevant to you on the plant floor and in your business. This survey is how you get us that information, because I generally take the top 7 topics that most people vote for, and those are going to be webinars or they're going to be short courses for the rest of the year. So if you want it, let us know in this survey. Right now, the odds of winning a prize for filling it out are very high. It's about 1 in 6 people are going to win something. So we've got all these things from Bunzel. Bunzel sends us a ton of prizes, including a $100 gift certificate. And then the grand top winner gets 5 free hours of meat plant operations consulting with NPAN. So you're going to be working with us on something that is ailing you or plaguing you in your plant. We're going to work through it together, and that's going to be free time with us. So I'm going to pop that link into the chat, but without further ado, I would love to uh, let go of the mic and let Chris jump in and introduce himself. And yeah, welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks, David. So some of you guys I know, some of you don't. So I'll just give you a brief intro. My name is Chris Fuller. I run Fuller Consulting, and my website, meetchris.com. And like David said, I focus on a wide array of operational and plant advising. So everything from food safety planning to uh, flow of product. Can can someone hear? You guys can hear me or no? I just gotta.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry there, Sandra. I'm not sure what's going on. And yeah, so equipment sourcing, vendor recommendations, and quotations, business plans, and last year started doing some grant writing. So kind of all under the umbrella of operational advising. So that's my background, and most of my clients are small or very small processors who are just getting into the business. But I do work with folks who have been in the industry their whole lives, and they run up against an issue with, possibly an inspection issue, or trying to make their plant become more efficient and reduce waste and things like that. So, happy to see you all here. What we're going to talk about today is, uh, like David said, plant bottlenecks. And the way that I want to frame it today is basically by looking at assessing risk in your plant. And what I mean by that is, there are some things that you can get by with, if they break down, or if it's not as efficient as it could be. But there are other things that are costing you money on a daily basis, or could cost you money, and even shut your plant down if you're not planning for all of these different risks that come up. And so we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at business continuity planning. We're going to take a look at, you know, looking at labor and things like that. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a slideshow that we're going to go through, but this is very much an open conversation. So I want you guys to really interject, ask questions, talk more about the topics that are important to you. And, we have as much time as you guys need to go through some of these topics. So
Thanks for
here we go.
mentioning that, Chris. Yeah,
Yeah.
just to reiterate what Chris said, if anybody has any questions, that's what makes the Ask Me Anything's great, is that it's a way for us to collaborate. Chris and I don't always have the answer. And sometimes the answers come from the audience, so please pop any questions you have into the Q&A, and I'll be kind of asking those to Chris as we go. Or feel free to use the raise your hand function under the reactions button if you'd like to talk. You're welcome to turn your camera on and use your mic too. You don't just have to type. So yeah, thanks, Chris.
Sure, you got it. So let's start off by talking about some bottlenecks that we've all experienced. I'd like to hear from you guys, but some that come to my mind are pretty common, which is, my smokehouse can only run so much product through it, right? So that's, that's an opportunity there to address a bottleneck. Do we expand the smokehouse? Do we, change our cycle times with different product development? There's different things we can do potentially there. Is it packaging? Do you need an upgrade in a packaging machine? Uh, is it your warehouse? You can't store any more product, right? Um, Animal handling. Maybe you don't have the best animal handling facilities that you could, and so it's really hard for you to get animals in the door at the same pace that your kill floor is running. Is it, your labeling? Maybe your labeling is very clunky and basic, and if you had a streamlined system for weighing and labeling, it would make your production go much faster. So if there's anything that you guys want to talk about off the cuff, to address any of these issues or other issues, I'm not gonna necessarily pause for too long, but like David said, put them into the chats and we can talk about them. Okay. Um, and when we talk about bottlenecks, basically, I guess we should address the main point here, which is that you have only so much square footage, you have so much labor that you've hired, and maybe labor is a bottleneck, but um, there are ways in any facility to try and eliminate a bottleneck, whether it's through increasing labor, whether it's through upgrading your equipment or getting a different piece of equipment. It doesn't necessarily need to be, all the bells and whistles, but maybe you just need a change in the type of equipment that you have. And maybe it's really just a matter of reassessing your flow of product. So you don't have to actually invest anything other than analyzing, how your product is flowing through the plant, and there might be a change that you can make there. It may be training, as in animal handling. So those are all things that we can look at with your plant and say, okay, there may be an opportunity to increase throughput to get more revenue without breaking the bank with a whole new line of equipment. Okay. And part of that, this is my passion, preventative maintenance. And so, um, I think that we can all admit that we have neglected some part of preventative maintenance in our plant, okay, at one time or another, right? So whether it's the facility or your equipment, uh, this is a really key component to not just addressing bottlenecks, but trying to eliminate what could become a bottleneck. And so, it may be your refrigeration system. It may be your floor. It may be, plumbing and drains, right? So there's different aspects that you really need to maintain to avoid a major failure that could shut your plant down. And those things are definitely possible. Equipment, same thing. If you have a key component to your processing line and it goes down, you may be stuck in the water. You may have a backup. You may have a backup that doesn't work as well or as fast. But these are things that you should be looking at to prevent major failure in the long run. And we're going to talk about what that could look like if you don't address those things. But I'd be interested to know how many people have a preventative maintenance program where it's written and you're following it and you're having somebody at your plant who manages it, checks it off, makes sure that you're keeping up with things, ordering backup parts, ordering supplies needed for these maintenance activities, whether it's oil, filters, gaskets, things like that. Do you have an outside service that comes and regularly services your facility and your major equipment, trucks, things like that? So put that into the chat if you guys actually do have a written preventative maintenance program at your plant.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah,
I just want to chime in real quick too to help you out here. So anyone that's got any equipment, newer or older, there is I've seen, with us and others are starting to do scheduled PMs to come in, every 6 months, every, however so often. That's something that if anyone's looking at new equipment and whatnot, make sure you're asking your supplier, hey, do you guys do things like that? Do you guys have someone in our area that can help you do all that? There's always really good questions.
absolutely. And I actually, I agree with you 100%. And I actually have a full slide just on that because I think it is so important. I think it's something that when people are looking at purchasing new equipment, that is one of the top questions. Does it come with a preventative maintenance program or just a regular maintenance program? Is there training available? So that maybe my maintenance tech can do that and we don't have to have somebody come out to do it. But then there are other suppliers that say, hey, as part of this purchase, you're going to get a year or 6 months or whatever it is of maintenance up front to make sure that once it's installed and once you're running it, you're recognizing the different things that you need to be taken care of as an operator. And we can dive into that in a little bit. Some of the things that can go wrong. Business continuity planning. Um, has anybody not heard of what business continuity planning is? Feel free to chime in.
Yeah, Chris, could you tell us more about what that is on a basic level?
Yeah, absolutely. So business continuity planning is something that I hadn't heard of in my career until I got up to like the corporate level, right?
Happened last night.
I was working at a lot of small plants, and this was not a set of words that I had ever heard before. Okay. And I don't expect everybody to have heard about it. I think that it's something that feels corporate, it sounds corporate, but is extremely important to anybody who owns or operates a business that is their livelihood. You have a lot of money sunk into your plants, right? You have a lot of your time and your energy, and most of us are very passionate about the plants that we're operating. And if something catastrophic happens, and it's a lot of times outside of your control, you need to understand what it is that you need to do at the time to recover. And what recovery means is recover product, recover service to your customers, and overall, recover your business so that you're not having to go through this process while your plant is down. Okay, so what we're talking about is we want to assess all the possible disruptions that could happen to your plant. If you're in California, that might be flooding, it might be wildfires, it might be high winds, and then of course there could be uh, disruptions in other parts of the country that affect your plant. So it could be tornadoes, floods, other things like that. And so you look at all the different disruptions. It could be a terrorist threat, right? It could be, somebody calls in a bomb threat, something of that nature. So everything that you can think of that could go wrong. You want to have a brainstorming session with all your management, your staff, and say, okay, guys, let's think about all the things that could go wrong here. Okay. And once you identify those, then you start to think about how can I prepare my business if this happens? And so what that looks like is saying, okay, well, if there's flooding, well, that means that maybe my employees can't come in. Maybe my supply of product can't come in. Maybe I can't ship. Maybe my actual plant gets flooded out. So then I have to worry about product, disposal. I have to think about mold. I have to think about all these different things that can happen to my business under these circumstances. And then you think about, okay, how can I respond? what's the best way to respond? What's the most ethical way? What is the way that's going to comply with regulatory compliance? And so you look at it from these different angles, and then you talk about recovery. So, okay, in that circumstance, if I lose all my product, if my employees can't come in, if there's an electrical hazard in my plant, how do I fix that and move on? And so once you have this plan in place and it's written and it's on your shelf in the office and probably on a backup computer offsite, you want to be able to look at that in the case that something like that happens, and it may be 5 years down the road, you go, oh, guess what? We actually talked about this in the business continuity planning. Let me go to the binder. And then you open it up, you look, you find fire, and you have a plan in place. So that way you're not spending precious time trying to go through these scenarios at the time that they're happening. So I encourage everyone. I know that time is not always available and it's extremely valuable, but again, this could be the make or break for your entire business. So I highly recommend looking at doing this process. And you may want an advisor, but you don't have to have one. These are things that you can come up with if you have a good, strong, creative personnel. You guys can come up with these plans. Okay.
This one really hits home, Chris.
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah, I have an example. I mean, I've got 1,000 examples as to why this is super important, but like, this reminds me of when I was a Boy Scout many, many years ago, and I had an emergency preparedness merit badge, right? Like, this is something that feels dry. It feels boring. It feels hypothetical. It doesn't give you nearly as much dopamine as running out to the plant floor to put out some fire that's happening, figuratively or literally. But
Right.
I've got this example. I used to manage this plant, and they didn't. I had just come in, so I had just started on October 30th, and 2 weeks prior to that, they had an incident. So they didn't have a PM program, and they didn't have a business continuity planning program. And this plant was struck by lightning. The lightning completely fried all of the electronics on the cooling system. They had 110 carcasses in the cooler, and those went unrefrigerated for 4 days because it was a holiday weekend.
Oh,
Because they didn't have a PM program, no one had changed the batteries in the wireless Wi-Fi data loggers to let them know that their coolers had warmed up. So they were
it
just
was a perfect waterfall of issues. Yeah.
perfect waterfall of issues, and those loggers kept presenting as being correct because they were powered down, and that was a
Wow.
glitch with that particular piece of equipment. And so it was a perfect storm. But the thing is like, when you take the time, like, to your point, I just want to hit home. I mean, and they also didn't have anybody on staff that realized they could do pathogen modeling and try to save some of that stuff, and it cost the company millions of dollars, right?
Yep.
And I started 3 or 4 days after that. So yeah, to your point, like, it seems like it could be a waste of time, or it's not going to get you a return on your investment of resources, but like, when you need it, it makes all of it worth it, even if you only need it once every 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Thanks for that example, because I think examples help kind of paint the picture. Like you said, it's a little bit dry, but I worked at a plant in Virginia where we had a weather event that I'd never heard of until then. It was called a derecho, and it was like tornado level winds, but in a straight line. And it came through and just knocked out the whole county's power. And kind of on the reverse of what we're talking about, the plant had the only backup generator in the county for a refrigeration room. And so we had our carcass cooler. We were able to turn on the generator and run it. And all the other food businesses in town were able to bring their product and store it in our cooler throughout until the power came back on. It was like 5 days until the power came back on. So anyway, so these plans can help save a lot of time, money, headache, stress, and potentially your whole business. So it is really important to talk about. And then what we were talking about before, you want to cover your ass, really. And when you're investing the amount of money that you may be in equipment, these are things that you want to ask your vendor up front. What's the warranty program? What's the maintenance program if you have one? Do you offer training on site? Do I have to send somebody to your place to be trained? Is it over the phone training that's involved? So these are important questions, because when you're talking with a supplier and they say, yeah, we have a training program, and then you find out that you have to fly your guy, halfway across the country to go to this, although it may be worth it, that's something that you need to know up front, right? When you're building out your return on investment model for this piece of equipment. So I've been in a lot of different situations where I have flown maintenance technicians to a facility to learn how to change valves and change gaskets and program computers and become the expert on a piece of equipment. I've been in scenarios where technicians come for multiple days to my plant and train my staff on site and say, this is, in your environment, this is how we're going to make this thing work. How do you run the preventative maintenance? Do they offer a supply kit for your first preventative maintenance? Here's all the oil filters, gaskets that you're going to need. It's in a kit, and here's how much it is. It's on the quotation. So these are things that some suppliers offer. There's some suppliers that don't. And so it's worth asking those questions. Because when you're running your return on investment analysis, which, we haven't really touched a whole lot on, but is also a very important exercise when you're talking about investing $25,000 to $250,000, depending on the piece of equipment that you're talking about, maybe even more. You want to understand how your return is impacting your business. And part of that is, these risk analysis. And so given that, we want to talk about making the right choice. So a risk analysis is something that I think is also really important to talk about here. And it's part of the business continuity planning. It's part of a return on investment. Because what you're really talking about here is, I'm going to invest X amount of dollars, and how much is it going to return to me? And you want to have multiple scenarios that you can actually run through and say, okay, if X happens, Y is my outcome, right? So if I'm looking at a mixer grinder, okay, I can buy a brand new model from vendor A. I can buy a brand new model from vendor B. I can go on eBay and buy a used model that comes with no support, right? And I have to arrange transportation for it from Iowa. There's a lot of different scenarios for purchasing equipment that you can run through, and you may say, you know what, I'm going to forego all of the support and the new machine because I want to buy a used machine. It's going to save me money. And my guy who does my grinding also knows how to fix Hobart, Biro, whatever brand you're looking at. And so, there are times where you, as a business owner, you can say, okay, I know what the risk is, and I know what I can do to mitigate the risk, right? But if you're looking around your building and you go, you know what? Nobody on staff knows how to fix this thing, and I'm 150 miles from the next, service technician for this piece of equipment. Well, then that helps inform your decision to say, maybe I want to go with a different brand from a different supplier that offers service in my area or offers a warranty. And so those are some of the scenarios that you can run through when you're looking at purchasing a new piece of equipment or upgrading a component to your facility and things like that. So analyzing the risk of what can happen and how valuable is that to your business. And we'll look at some different scenarios of what happens if. But taking a look at the financial impact, the impact on your customers, and on the food safety of the product that you're producing. Those are all things that you need to look at when talking about upgrading or purchasing a component to your product flow, your facility or your equipment. And then we talked about the business continuity plan and what the cost is of doing nothing, which could be detrimental. And then, choosing the right partnerships within the supplier community. And so those are all things that you can look at. And going to trade shows helps a lot, right? Going to your Meat Processors Association conferences where the suppliers have an equipment show. Picking up the phone and just talking with them, getting quotations, talking to them about what their businesses are going to do for you. And of course, we have the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network, the Google email list. And that has been really helpful, I think, for a lot of folks asking the question, hey, I'm thinking about purchasing this. Has anyone had experience with it? Any other recommendations? And people will always chime in and say, hey, I haven't used that, but I've used this and it works really well for me, So those are all things that you can do to help make the right decision. So here's some of those scenarios we're talking about. And these are based on real examples, okay? And so, I was part of a business where just like David described the perfect scenario of disaster, not as big of an impact, but certainly impactful to our business. Our patty maker went down, and it was right before Christmas. And we're in Southern California, which is like the burger capital of the world, right? So everybody has a burger on the menu. And so our patty maker goes down. We call the technician and he's like, hey, it's Christmas. I can't get down there. I can't get parts even until, 5 days from now. And so we're not going to be able to make hamburger patties for at least 5 days. And what that turns into is not just lost revenue, but then you have the issues with customers who go to a different vendor, right? Because they have to have the hamburger, for service. So they end up going to a different vendor and, God forbid they actually like the product, or it happens to work better for their cost. And then, you potentially just lost an entire customer. They need to rely on you for that service in their busiest season. So, you've lost trust, you've potentially lost customers. Your labor is disrupted, your product flow is disrupted. You were counting on having to grind X amount of pounds, and now it's just going to sit in the cooler because you don't have an outlet for it. So, maybe it's in a combo bin. What do? Do you unload your combo bin, box it, and freeze it? Do you hope that it doesn't go bad until the parts come in? So there's a lot of different avenues that can affect just having your patty maker go down, right? And we actually had a backup machine, and the backup machine was down. And so that goes back to the preventative maintenance program not having been followed through and saying this machine needs maintenance so that if this machine goes down, we have a backup. Didn't get done. And so we had 2 machines that were no good and no way to make patties. So that's a scenario where, to be candid with the group, the management of that company just wasn't putting enough emphasis on maintenance and the importance of risk analysis. You could tell them all day long, hey, I think we need to spend more money on this category of our P&L. And that's one of the first things that they always wanted to cut. So it came back to bite them. Here's another scenario. Water pump. You work in a processing plant where you do kill, cut, and wrap. And because of the way that your wastewater system is designed, you have to have a pump to remove that water from the holding tank to get out to the pond. Okay. The pump goes down. You don't have a way to move that water. So you essentially are shut down until you get that pump fixed. You call the service tech. Hey, that particular part is actually on back order because of issues in the supply chain. Now you're sitting there going, if we had only bought a backup to our pump 2 years ago, when supply issues weren't as bad, or the price wasn't as much, or whatever the case may be. So these are decisions that you're making as an operator to say, do I buy the backup now and hold it in case something goes bad? Maybe I don't need a whole backup unit, but maybe I need a key part that's hard to get or is so critical to my business that if it goes down, I'm going to lose a ton of money. And so you can see this is just in 5 days. This particular plant lost $70,000 in revenue because they couldn't kill, and a lot of margin and repair costs. So these are scenarios that are very real, and I think that we can all take a look at our plants and think about what really could go wrong and what is the best way to solve for that issue. There are components to your system that are so critical that if they go down, you can't do business at all. And there are other components where, okay, it goes down, but I can still do business. I might lose a little bit on this particular product. Say it's a slicer, right? I can still sell whole and half ham, but I can't sell sliced ham. Well, maybe that's acceptable for a week, maybe it's not when it's Easter. You know what I mean? So you have to really think about what it means to your business, every piece to your entire facility, every piece to your product flow, and talk to yourself and your staff about what's a risk I'm willing to take and what's a risk that I just am not willing to take. And that's kind of the point of the conversation that we're having here. And these are lessons that I think all of us have learned over the past 3, 4, probably 5 years now. Disruptions in labor, disruptions in transportation of getting product or shipping product. Maybe it's the bigger world out there. I run a small plant, but the issues at the port for exports is actually damaging my business because I'm trying to get parts or I'm trying to get supplies and I can't because they're having issues at the port exporting and importing product and parts and equipment. And I'm sure Spencer and anybody else here who has worked with equipment supplies can tell you that it's just been an absolute nightmare with sourcing raw materials to make equipment and parts, sourcing equipment and parts that are made out of country. Really just we've all seen the price of plastic skyrocket, cardboard, all these things that have impacted our businesses. Those are all conversations we should be having to say, are there ways that I can improve the efficiency to my plant or the bottom line at my plant by transitioning away from one system to another, adding a component, training my staff differently. There's a lot of conversations we can have around this, but that's the story that we're telling today and the conversation we're having today. And so, with that, let's dive into some conversation and talk about some things that we can do as a group to help each other get through these risk analysis, business continuity plans, any bottlenecks that you guys have that you want to try to solve for. These are things that we can talk about now.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
You bet.
As always, I've got several people in preparation for these send me questions to be asked via email. So I've got a handful of those. And then yeah, we're able to open the floor up. We got a couple questions in the chat, and people can share their experience, and we can talk through some stuff. So, first thing, let's see. The first question I've got, and I think this is really what I want to get down to. Um, as you know, like there's different approaches to the standardizing of processes in different plants of different sizes. So when you're in a plant with 50 to 75 employees, it can feel, you've got people who are like potentially certified in lean, or you've got SQF practitioners. You've definitely got in a plant of 75 people, a dedicated QC manager. It's a different environment. But when you're in a plant that's like 5 to 15 employees, maybe it's 40 years old and the common thread is this is how we've always done it. Maybe it's 5 years old and it's a startup and run by ranchers who wanted to take control of their own processing. We've got this smattering of different types of facilities here.
Sure.
When we're working with these smaller plants that have less personnel, less training, and less resource when it comes to manufacturing concepts, how do you start to take these big concepts and make them bite size? How do we right size them for the tiny plant? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I also, I guess let's start with that. What are your thoughts on implementing these plans into small plants who maybe don't already have a super robust quality management program? How do you sell the idea that it's worth your time and resource to start thinking as a manufacturer and less like somebody who's relying on elbow grease?
Well, it is a cultural thing. And what I mean by that is, everybody always talks about corporate culture or company culture, and and this is not disparaging at all. It's a great asset to come from a ranching background where something breaks, you fix it, and you know how to fix it, right? And you've got the tools and the parts on hand, or you don't, and you go and make something, in the shop. Um, that works sometimes in meat processing. We have a lot of equipment that has not changed over the years and is very, basic motors, easy electrical. The plumbing is still plumbing. So there are things where, you can transfer that mentality over and say, okay, if something breaks, I know how to fix it, or I got somebody on staff who knows how to fix it. Um, there are other things, however, that being in the year that we're in with the development and technology that we've had, uh, it's beyond being able to fix it in the shop. It may be a computer motherboard. It may be a German engineered valve that if you don't have that valve, there's no fixing it, you know? Um, and so what I would recommend is number one, take advantage if you don't have the time and resources on hand at the time. Take advantage of some of the TA consulting that we have available, the message boards, um, call David or me, send an email and just say, I don't have the time to put an outline together and start this. Um, and I don't know where to start. Can you at least give me that first step? And I think we can easily provide you with an outline and say, here's step one, here's step two, here's step three. And once you have that, I feel like it kind of takes the pressure off because you don't have to be overwhelmed by saying like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what the first question is to ask. Once you have an outline in front of you, you can take some time and it doesn't have to be done in a week. You can take the first year, you can take a first quarter, and you can say, okay, every Monday for 10 minutes, we're going to have a meeting. We're going to address one bullet point, and then we're going to go to work. And, you can use some of your training time for that. You can use some of your, um, pre-shift meeting. But you can try and address things in bite-sized chunks. And if you have an outline that's been given to you by somebody who's recommending this as an advisor, it shouldn't cost you anything or very little, and it'll help you to start that process. And I think once you start it, you're going to start to view things the way that we're talking about them now. You're going to start to look around your plant while you're working and go, oh yeah, what if my hoist breaks on the kill floor? What am I going to do? Do I have a backup? Great if I do. If not, maybe I have a different situation that I can work through. So that's what I would say for people that may think that this is a task that if I don't have a dedicated staff member who takes care of these types of things, I can't do it. I think you can if you're given the right kind of starting point.
Great. Let's see. I got a question from Pat. Pat asks, do you have any data logger recommendations? And this is for monitoring refrigeration.
I mean, there's a handful of good ones out there. The only one that I've ever used is Magtech, and I like it. It's easy to integrate. It's generally cost effective depending on the model that you get. It's been reliable for me, but yeah, I'm sure that there are other companies out there that are similar. So yeah.
Yeah, Magtech has been successful for me. ThermoWorks has some good setups that have worked well for room monitoring specifically. So production spaces
Kind of
and
an
refrigeration.
outlier that I'll mention is, and I'm not even sure if they're still around, but years ago, I was contacted by a company called Kitchen Brains, and they had never worked in meat processing. It was a company that did timers and temperatures for fast food. So fryers and walk-in coolers and things like that. And it was pretty cool because it was like a wireless, cloud-based it would log the data on the cloud and I could access it from anywhere on the website. And it was it was just like some thermometers and a little router, it was super simple. And that helped me because it was affordable. And it was service based. So it was like, every month I paid whatever it was, $100. Um, but it was constantly monitoring all of my refrigerators, um, my coolers, everything that I had products stored in. And that to me was very valuable because I could check, to your point earlier, it wasn't battery based, it was plugged in and it was showing me in real time. So anytime the inspector had a question about records, I could just pull up the date range and print it.
Sure. Great. Okay. So we got three: Kitchen Brains, Magtech, and ThermoWorks. If anybody else has any companies they like, they want to share with the group, please do pop it into the chat. Let's see. I've got one here from email. What is a typical warranty slash service program slash, operator and or maintenance personnel training program look like from a supplier? So you're calling up Ultrasource, Huntsman, Riser, whoever it is. What's something that you can expect from sales personnel, and what's something in your experience that may not be offered that you should be asking about specifically?
Also, very good question. I think certainly every company is going to have a little bit of a different program, but the warranty generally is going to be like 6 months to a year for overall. And certainly I can be corrected on this if anybody else wants to chime in, but then there's like manufacturer's warranty, which is going to be for defects and things like that, which is probably going to be longer. So um the general wear and tear won't be covered. That's pretty much expected in a meat plant, right? You're going to have bumps and bruises on the machine, and that's not the manufacturer's responsibility. Um, preventative maintenance programs, a lot of times they'll do the first year if that's offered. They might, again, supply you with the kit where you have to do it yourself with your maintenance tech. Most manufacturers, I would say, are not going to send a technician to do a PM as part of the package. It may be something you can arrange if you want. If you don't have a good technician nearby, you might say, okay, I want to pay extra for you guys to come out for the next 4 and do them, but that can be a little bit expensive. And so that's kind of what I'm used to seeing. If you want, again, you can ask for extras. You can say, hey, can you guys ping me every 4 months and tell me to reorder the parts, and just tell me which parts to get, because I don't have the bandwidth to sit down and think about these things. Although I would recommend that you do. That's a conversation you can have, and you can say, can you recommend me parts that I should just have on hand all the time? Because
Yeah.
there are things like gaskets, they'll just go out at a random time, and there's no predicting it. So there may be parts that you want to keep on hand all the time, and then there are the PM parts that are once every quarter or once every year.
Yeah, that's the thing that you just mentioned there, the component of a PM program. Like obviously you've got the calendar, right? But the spare parts inventory list seems like kind of low-hanging fruit, but when you don't have one of those, it's an absolute game changer. And
Oh yeah.
what I like to do is I like to take my Google Calendar and actually use that to ping my maintenance team member or team members when they need to do certain things, then kind of show them how to do that and then hand that off to them and say, look, you got to schedule your own PMs on your equipment. But it's that spare part inventory list. And actually we've got a couple ultra source people here in the meeting today. We got Spencer and Derek. And I will say that that is something that their service manager, Rob, was fantastic about last time I worked with them. He sent me an easy to read and easy to use spare parts list for a very complex piece of equipment, like, a thermoformer machine, and made a lot of difference, and that was really helpful for us, getting that directly from the horse's mouth rather than having to extrapolate it from the manual. So,
Yeah, which sometimes is in German.
yeah, that's true. That is very true. Yeah.
That's always my favorite, is when you pull out the manual and you're like, oh man, I really need to figure out this part, this spring that's in here. And it's like, a 25 long letter long word. You're like, I have no idea. Is that the spring? I don't know. You know?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course it's always off hours and you can't get somebody on the phone, and you're scrambling. So again, let's identify these things before they happen, so that you're not sitting there, 3 of you in the office at, 6 p.m. leafing through a German manual trying to find out how the hell am I going to get this part tomorrow,
Yeah. Yep. And it is an upfront cost, but what you save down the road in overnight shipping by having a spare parts locker, it will pay for itself, again
Yeah,
and again.
that company that I was talking about with the patty maker, I can't tell you how much hundreds and hundreds of dollars we spent in overnight shipping fees, because it just was always a reaction. It was never a predetermined, this is what we need on hand, so it's a big deal. And I think anybody who's had something major go down would agree that, this is something that's important to be talking about. And you're all here now, which means that you think it's important too, you know?
Chris, we had a question from Kama. Kama asks, had some questions about halal slaughter, and I recommended Dr. Joe from Cornell to speak with Kama. But there was a question about equipment and facility design. Do you have any experience or recommendations when needing to look at halal specific equipment or like process flow design?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are components certainly to certain equipment that is in my opinion necessary to be doing a traditional halal slaughter on, if we're talking about cattle. Um, you can't fudge that. Like, it's got to be done just right. And so I don't have a specific vendor to recommend to say that, these guys have a piece of equipment that's perfect for what you're talking about. But what I would recommend is contacting a handful of suppliers for your knockbox and your restraining equipment, and making sure that number one, they understand what you're asking for, and they have experience with it. And if they don't, I would probably recommend moving on. I think that you should be able to find somebody who is familiar with the process that you're talking about before, you have to explain it to them. And that would be my recommendation. But essentially that's the piece that we're talking about. Pretty much the rest of the process is going to be no different from a different, commercial type processing. But again, that restraint in the knockbox is what you need. You need a good, head chin lift and restrainer so that the animal is calm, but you have easy access to the throat, and you're able to perform the slaughter.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Yep.
Spencer's got a question.
Yeah, I just want to add on to kind of what Chris was saying. I mean, just things that we get all the time when a customer calls and asks for like a halal box or anything like that. Some of the questions is full rotation. Do you want them to be able to lay all the way down, like a rotational trap? Like Chris is saying, big chin lift, right? You gotta make sure you're getting the chin lift that you want. The other thing is how's your kill floor laid out? Because in the halal practice, the box has to be facing towards Mecca, so you really have to make sure, hey, do I have the space for this? Is this where this is going to go? It's not something you can just throw in because, hey, it fits here, right? It's got to make sure that you're going through the full practice. So just wanted to kind of point those out, like what Chris is saying.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're starting from scratch and you're designing your facility, you have the ability to do that. If you're trying to purchase and renovate a facility, it may be tougher, right? Because your chute comes into the kill floor where it comes in. So you may have some major modifications to make. So that's a good point. Thanks for pointing that out.
Okay, another question that came through email. Chris, is it best to contact the manufacturer, or is it best to hire a local repair person, especially when living rurally?
I'm assuming for regular service.
I'm thinking this question is focused probably on either emergency repair or something in a rurally located processing plant.
Yeah, I think that being in a rural area makes it more difficult to access service, right? And I'm sure that's the experience here. So what I usually recommend is if you don't already have your equipment, right? If you're starting fresh and you're trying to build an equipment list, I would highly recommend working with suppliers who either have a service technician within your area, but if they don't, try and find equipment. Well, and this is case by case, but say you have somebody in your area who's got a shop and they can machine stuff and they can work on motors and vacuum pumps and basic stuff, right? Try and find equipment that's not overly complex. So there may be a piece of equipment that, when you're looking at equipment A and equipment B, you say, okay, this one has a push button start. This one has a computer. Maybe you go with the push button start because you can actually fix that on site pretty easily. You don't have to order in a part and know how to program that. So those are just like case by case. But a lot of suppliers will send a technician to you, no matter where you are. It may cost you something, but you will have service. There are other suppliers that don't have that ability, and so you're stuck. So I would ask those questions if you're upgrading equipment or purchasing new. How technical are the repairs to this piece of equipment? What does it do for your business? Is it essential? Is it something that you really need to have all the bells and whistles, or can it be more basic? But if it can't, then yeah, you need to know that you have somebody who can come and perform that service. Um, Even in a rural environment, there just may not be somebody locally that can fix it. So those are good questions.
Yeah, when I was in rural Michigan managing a plant, one thing that I learned to do over time was if I had to have somebody come out, I would discuss with the service manager other things and
Yeah,
try to at
while you're
least
here.
well, yeah, but like don't spring it on them when they get there because nobody's going to be happy about that. And they're not going to have the parts. Like actually, get a hold of the service manager and say like, look, you're coming out to do this thing, but I also, I've had this thing for 10 years and I've done the PM, but it probably needs like a good once over. And, I've got this thing happening and I could use some training on this thing. Like if, be upfront about what you want from them. Because usually, as long as you're honest, then they'll be able to work with you to get you a package that is appropriate. But like that's a way to at least make it worth it.
Well, right, because you're paying for the travel anyway,
Yep.
so you might as well fill up their time. The other thing that I just thought of too is, like I mentioned before, there are suppliers that you can send someone out and they will train them on how to do some of these maintenance activities. So if you're buying a thermoform machine and they're not going to be able to rebuild the whole thing, but they can replace a valve, they can program the computer, they can you know fix a mold or heating plate or whatever it is, right? You may be able to have someone on your team who you send out and pay for that training. That way, you're not always having to call somebody for a small fix. If it's major, you may still need somebody to come out, but at least you've got somebody on hand that can do some basic repairs and maintenance.
Now, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization, but I will, and I would say that at least 7 to 8 times out of 10, when a new piece of equipment gets installed and it's behaving in a way that you don't expect it to, it is most likely, as painful as this is to hear, operator error. Like there's probably some deeper training that we missed, or there's like something thermoform machines, like you practice, they're even the simplest of them are like it's a pretty steep learning curve, especially, and those are the ones that I see a lot of people struggle with, and I had a client out in the East Coast, a plant that I worked with. They had a thermoformer. It wasn't working. They were just gonna throw it away and buy a brand new
Yeah.
one from a different company. And like, I started working with them and got a quote from the original company that put it together. And they said, we can completely refurbish this for 30% the cost of a new one. You know what I mean? And so it's like, at the end of the day, it's just ask questions, right? Like closed mouths don't get fed when it comes to this stuff.
And that's a really good point. And I've also run into scenarios where talk about operator error. You've got somebody on staff who's been using this machine for 10 years, thinks they know every single thing about it, but they're in that tunnel vision of what they know. And if you bring somebody out and they go, "Oh, why do you have this setting like this?" Or why do you have the temperature this high, or whatever the case may be, and you find out they just haven't had the perfect settings for what you're trying to do, and all of a sudden you're wasting less film, you're getting less leakers, all these kinds of things where you think your packaging cost is X and your labor cost is X, but now you've just had a major win by just changing the setting, you know? So there's a lot that goes into especially thermoform, but even chamber vac machines, even mixer grinders with the amount of time that you're grinding, or you may have a worn part that's creating heat or friction. There's a lot of different things that preventative maintenance and having good technical support is going to help you to create a better product and do it faster and more efficiently.
Derek's got a question.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Derek.
Yeah, I was just gonna tag on to what David was saying about when you reach out to service for any company and you have multiple pieces of equipment, it's not a bad idea to say, hey, it wouldn't hurt while you're here, just go through these and see, check seals, do all that kind of stuff. But also, what we've seen in the last couple of years is if you're in a certain region and hey, I'm buying X equipment because my neighbor might have something, you know, hey, why don't you, while you're out here, why don't you reach out to plant XYZ down the road, see if they need anything, and then kind of split up service tech travel costs. Now, instead of going for a day, that guy might be able to go to 3 days and hit 5 plants if you know there's other folks in the area. And we see a lot of that. We've got a lot of regional, um, okay, it's called presences, where as equipment gets into place, it's a heck of a lot easier for guys to get out there and hit multiple spots. So
That's a great thought. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I like that idea of splitting travel costs. That's a very good idea. And if you're in a place, for instance, in New England, I was working with a plant in southwestern New England, and there was like 6 plants within 20 minutes, and there's so many folks using the same stuff. So that's a really good idea. Yeah, if you have good relationships with your neighbors, or at least good enough to save some money, I think that's
Right.
awesome. Let's
Yeah.
see, who else have we got here? We had a great question about insurance. Um, Derek gave a recommendation. Thank you so much for that, Derek. I took a note. Also, Tina, if you were to take a look on the NPAN Google group, if you're a member, great. If you're not, please do join. Go under Google Groups, search NMPAN and join. I moderate it, so I'll see your name come across. We've had that question come up a few times recently, and there have been some other recommendations that have come through, but they're like pretty few and far between. And to Derek's point, AMP is definitely that's what AMP is good at. We're good at plant operations, business development. AMP is all about stuff like insurance and food safety and nutritional analysis and things like that in their member services. So yeah, great suggestion. Let's see. What other questions do I have from email? I've got a couple questions they're like basically the same, and it's about managing change. So I do want to ask a question about bottlenecks, but I would be interested to hear, I think we kind of asked this, but you know, would like to hear from your perspective, and would even like to hear, we've got Derek Schroeder and Spencer Carter here from Ultrasource. I'm just curious, like, what do people see small plants struggling with when implementing new programs like PM programs? Like, what do we see? And have you seen any small plants with innovative approaches to getting buy-in from their crew?
Really good question, because I think we've all been in the situation where we as managers really want to implement a new type of program. Okay, starting Monday, we're all required to check this box on this sheet. And it's like pulling teeth to get anybody to do it, because it's not the way that we've done it. And what's the point? And why are we even doing this? It sounds like a waste of my time, I'm here to cut meat, not check boxes, So it can be difficult, but I think the best approach is, number one, before you even go down the road, you need to engage with your staff and say, hey guys, what do you think needs to be improved? What would make your life easier? And even the grumpiest meat cutter is going to say like, well, I would love to, get a knife sharpener that works, or, they've got something on their mind that would help improve a process, maybe it's, better training for the people down the line from them. But I think that all of us want to produce a really good product and have our skills translate into a beautiful, delicious, high quality meat product. And that's why we do it. And so if we can start there and say, how are we going to accomplish this goal together? and what is your headache? What's your bottleneck personally? How can we address that? Then the conversation is coming from them instead of being passed down to them. And so if we start there, knowing as a manager where we're trying to get to, but just allowing them to voice their opinion, be heard, and be part of the process. Maybe you bring some of your leadership group in from production to look at some of the options of vendors, and maybe one of them has worked with a piece of equipment 20 years ago, and they go, oh, I used to love that company, or I hated that company. The worst thing that you can do is say, hey, we just bought a new grinder, and they take a look at it and they go, oh, that thing's trash. And it's like, well, shit, we already bought it. So I think that's what we want, is for people to feel heard, feel like they're driving the conversation, and that really helps to instill that that spirit of change before it's passed down to them.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I know that you really focus on culture and engagement in your management techniques. We've talked about that in the past.
Well,
That's a
not
whole
only that, but we talk all the time about how hard it is to get good labor, right? And the experience that I've had with companies as a consultant, but also as a manager, the ones that are successful in retaining labor and having skilled workers stick around are the ones that have positive culture. And part of that is, listening sessions, meetings with your staff, having them be part of the process, and then they pass that down to other workers who are new, and it spreads. But
It does.
if you have the guy who's grumpy and you're always butting heads, that spreads too.
It does.
Yeah.
Spencer.
Yeah, so to speak to what you would ask David on how we see customers implementing PMs and PM programs and stuff like that. One of the biggest things we harp on is whoever's running that piece of machinery needs to take ownership of it, right?
Yes.
So I mean, there's facilities I know all across the states that, for example, there's one up in Michigan that they go through and actually each guy has ownership of whatever he's running, right? So there's a guy that has the stuffer. At the end of the day, he's in charge of cleaning it. He's in charge of everything, making sure everything looks good. He literally, I watch him. I've seen him multiple times. Oil his entire machine down, just so it's spick and span and pretty. If anyone were to walk through, they take. If you give someone that almost as a gift, right? You take care of this, it'll take care of you. You'll see your employees really care about it a lot more, and they know, all right, this makes my life a lot easier, so I need to take care of it. So
and yeah, that's a really good point. And on the flip side, if you have a constant rotation of employees working on a piece of equipment that don't have any sense of ownership, I mean, I've seen it just absolutely nosedive,
Yep.
because they don't care. They're not going to be there tomorrow. They'll be somewhere else in the plant, and it's like, I'm just trying to get stuff done as fast as possible. And it really takes its toll. So I totally agree with that. There's a lot to be said about cross training, and I think that's really important to have cross training. But I also agree with having people be experts at what they're doing, even if it's wrapping, even if it's boning out chucks, like whatever it is that they're doing, allow them to excel at it, and like you said, take ownership over it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good strategy, Spencer, for small plants that have to feature operator-driven sanitation, where the people, we don't have a cleaning crew coming in overnight and taking care of that stuff. I think that's an awesome strategy.
Well, that's another good point, is what if you do have a third-party sanitation crew, and what are they doing to the equipment? Are they losing parts? Are they damaging the machine when they're cleaning it? Do they even know how to clean it properly? So, because it's a third party, you may think, well, they don't need any training. This is their job. They do this everywhere. still a good idea to have a full training session and say, this is our plant, this is our equipment, this is how we want it cleaned, this is where the parts go, this is how you oil them. And keeping them accountable for those things is very important for sure.
I've got one question before you, Derek, and then I'm gonna keep an eye on the time because I know Chris, you've got another one coming up here pretty quick. So this question comes from Josh, and Josh, we might end up having to take this one offline to do a little deeper dive to make sure that I totally understand the full question, but I do want to just touch on it to at least make some connections for you and get the ball rolling. So Josh asks, how are folks handling the new traceability requirements coming down the pipes? Scanning, temp checks, counting, work orders. It's causing tons of bottlenecks in our process. So I'm curious, Chris, or if anybody else in the call, I'm not aware of any new regulatory requirements for the things named in that message. So sounds like I've got something to learn here. And also, I'm curious from Josh if you're a federally inspected plant or if you're custom exempt. Because I think a lot of material handling and transfer is extremely important for yield analysis and understanding whether you're profitable or not and what your true cost of goods sold are. So those things that you're naming are kind of typical parts of my process in the meat processing plant, but I also know in different models, like a custom exempt plant, there's less emphasis on those things. So let's start with the first question about traceability requirements. Chris, are you aware of anything new coming? And if so, what can you tell us about it?
Oh, but I see in the chat, Josh just put FDA under GMP audits. So
Okay, FDA,
that's
gotcha.
that's outside of my world. The FDA is not something that I deal with, but we can talk about this as if it were required by USDA, right? So if there are checks that you need to be doing that you're not used to doing, it can be difficult. It can be difficult to have one person be in charge of all of it. It can be difficult to try and get somebody who does not have an attention to detail to have to then have attention to detail, whether it's, putting things away in the same place, checking off documentation, doing records reviews or direct observations properly. But what it comes down to is there's probably 100 different ways that you can document things. And so we need to figure out, like David said, with this may be a larger conversation, but we need to figure out the flow of product first and where checkpoints make sense. And then we need to create a system that doesn't require 10 minutes of documentation per check, right? It makes it as quick and easy as possible, whether that's combining technology with the operator's ability to document. There may be automatic ways to check, there may not be, it may be manual, but trying to figure out the best scenario for your particular plant to alleviate the amount of time and detail that's required by the person doing the check is really most of the time the best way to do it. So if we're talking about temperature checks, or if we're talking about environmental swabbing, or whatever the test is that we're doing, that's really, we need to start there and figure out, number one, what's the requirement? Number two, is there technology that can do it for me at an affordable rate? And number three, how much training is really involved, whether it's one person or multiple people. So we can work on that with you, Josh, offline.
Yeah,
But
Josh. Yeah, sorry, Chris. Yeah, we can work on that, Josh. I'd love to hear more about what you're producing. Sounds like if you're FDA, it's probably an RTE facility, assuming, or something maybe cosmetic or non-edible related. So yeah, if I just put my email in the chat, Chris, if you want to as well, please feel free. Josh, please do reach out to us and we can get you set up on a technical assistance call with Chris, and start to dig into what's ailing you at the plant level. But I think that's a great place to start, Chris.
Yep. But to your point earlier, David, these are things that are part of our normal, process as advisors and as people who have been in multiple different processing scenarios is recognizing that the traceability of product through your plant is just going to help you in the long run to understand all the different things, your costing, your yields, preventing food safety issues. And so that's part of the risk analysis that we're going to do. And one nice thing is having an advisor kind of present you with this program helps save you time and energy, but it also allows the breadth of knowledge from multiple operations to come and try and fit into your plant. So it could be a helpful thing to try and work with a TA advisor for something like that.
Derek, what do you got?
I was just going to add on to what you guys were saying earlier about kind of lost my train of thought. I got sidetracked in an email.
Well, you can think
Anyway,
about
it's
it for a
really
second
good.
if you want.
Yeah, you guys are doing great.
One thing to think about, we haven't touched on a lot today because there's so much to talk about when it comes to expectations around preventive maintenance and dealing, with vendors and the excitement of purchasing new equipment and all of those things. That's a webinar in and of itself. But one thing that Chris does specifically that we haven't talked a lot about is assessing bottlenecks in the plant. And so if those of you who joined would like to talk about that specifically, again, if you want to follow the link, I posted it in the chat, but I'm gonna post it again to our technical assistance page on the NPAN website. You can book a call with me, with Chris, with like 14 other people who can help you, depending on their expertise, work on assessing bottlenecks and alleviating those in your plant. So yeah, please do reach out. And Derek thought of his question.
I was really a question. It was more just a statement about challenges that processors see. We obviously the last couple of years we've been dealing with a lot of new plant startups, processors coming from production, whether it's livestock production predominantly, and then starting a facility. We can go there for a week and train, but if we're only training one person, there is a very high likelihood that in 6 months that person isn't going to be there, and the next guy that steps up to the machine is going to curse the supplier as we didn't get trained, and
Yeah.
so when
Or it's like a game of telephone where, it's like, well, he told me to do this. And it's like, that's not the right way.
well, back to what you were saying about, a guy has owned that machine, he's been doing it for 20 years. We had a plant in Iowa that, they had a fry stuffer and we twist link everything by hand. It's like, well, why? That can have an automatic twist link. Oh, this machine doesn't. Well, the guy that had been running it for 20 years retired, didn't like the twist linker, and it's sitting on the shelf.
Yeah.
And now they're calling you saying, hey, what's going on here? And it's like, well, we can come train you on how to use a twist linker. We'd love to do that. So just that kind of stuff. If say from a ownership or management perspective, as a supplier and someone who does trainings, I'd love to have you involved, because then it gives you have skin in the game, right? You're not quitting, you're not leaving. This is your livelihood. So if we can get you trained, then you at least, if that guy walks off the job, you can at least kind of limp through production until we can get someone else trained. So that's my 2 cents, is have cross training is absolutely critical. And then from a supplier perspective, we like to train people with skin in the game, whether it's owners, managers, whoever you get, that you're for sure isn't going to leave, especially in startups.
Well, I
There's
also
constant
think
turnover.
that having a good relationship with your supplier is really important, just touching base and having conversations. How are things going with the pieces of equipment that we have? And I think it helps form a relationship. It helps when you do call, that they know who you are, and you don't have to go and find serial numbers and all this stuff. It's really nice to have a supplier that you have a relationship with that knows your name and knows what you have on hand, and I think that helps as well.
Fantastic, everybody. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time today. Thanks to everybody in the audience who had good questions, and the folks that sent me questions ahead of time. Derek, Spencer, it was great to have a vendor's perspective here today. Thank you very much for sharing some of your experiences. And just know that Chris and I are still available for deeper dives on these things. So I imagine we'll probably do another one of these that's really focused on plant operations in 3 or 4 months. Something like that. We like to do one quarterly if we can. But in the meantime, please reach out at that technical assistance group. It's free. We're not selling you something when it comes to this. It's already been paid for by the USDA. Our time, our consulting time to our community members is free. So please take advantage. And next month, we'll be here with Ryan Brozovic, and we're going to be talking about sales strategies, how to utilize the whole carcass, how to sell more meat without having to be a full-time salesperson. So thanks, everybody. It's been great as always, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.